Hello and welcome. Kim Knight here, aka the Kiwi Health Detective. And in our webinar today, I'm going to be talking about the metaphysical or beyond physical meaning behind prostate cancer. So as I record this webinar, it is Prostate Awareness Month in New Zealand, and that was what prompted me to do this webinar this month. Now, just to introduce myself, if this is the first time that you've been hearing from me, I specialize in isolating or helping people to isolate and then clear the metaphysical cause or meaning of physical symptoms. And as you're going to be hearing in this webinar, our physical body has a dual function. Our body has the physical function of keeping us alive physically, but it also has a beyond physical function, which has more to do with how we manage our life. And that is what I specialize in. And I love helping people to isolate and clear the real root cause of illness, because unless we do this at a fundamental level, we cannot achieve total healing. And before I go on, just a brief medical disclaimer. I do not diagnose, treat, cure, or heal any illness. Only a doctor can do that. But what I do is I educate on the metaphysical reason and cause of physical illness. And I show people if they deal with things at this beyond physical or metaphysical level, they can achieve total comprehensive healing. So if you need to seek appropriate medical advice, please do so. And this webinar is for informational purposes only. So let's get into the webinar. The purpose is to show you the metaphysical meaning behind symptoms of prostate cancer, which will help to dispel much fear around the big C word. Because unfortunately, one of the things with cancer is that there is a lot of fear. And when one really understands what causes this illness, it really takes away the fear. And one of the things that is very detrimental to the body healing at all is when we stay in fear, when we're in the stress response. And the two go hand in hand. The stress response is very connected with fear. Now, just some brief background. I'm going to have to set the scene here with some background before we get to the prostate. And I want to share how much medicine has changed in the last 10, 20 years. Now, our current model, which I refer to as our old model, which is slowly becoming superseded by a new model, is that if people have a physical illness or a symptom or condition, they focus on a physical solution. But as you're going to see, this will never work completely, because there are other aspects of our being which we must take into account and actually relate to what is causing the problem in the first place. So our Western medical system is very physically focused, and it tends to just treat the end result. And it tends to see that disease is random and a mistake, that maybe it's to do with diet, maybe it's to do with food, maybe it's to do with stress, but there's not a very deep understanding of what actually causes the problem. And in fact, I was at a congress, a health congress recently this year, where a medical doctor said that only in 40% of cases can they diagnose a condition, and only in 5% of cases can they say what has actually caused the problem. Now, the work that I do does that other 95%. It helps people to actually understand what has caused the issue. And in order to effect a complete healing, we must look at that level. And genetics has long been superseded by epigenetics, although not that many people know about this. So genetics says that your genes are set, they are what they are, you inherit them, and that's it. Whereas epigenetics has discovered that our genes actually can be changed and are turned on and off by what happens in our environment. So we have a response to what is going on in our environment, a cellular, emotional response, and that literally changes our genes. And rather than having just a physical focus, this new medicine, this meta medicine, and meta means to go beyond, this meta medicine focuses on the totality of a human being the mind, body, energy, spirit, the totality of our being. And meta medicine deals with dealing and solving the root cause of a problem. So first of all, identifying that root cause and then resolving it. Whereas mainstream conventional medicine really focuses on treating just the end result, just trying to get rid of symptoms as quickly as possible, either with medication or surgery, but not really asking what has caused the problem in the first place and dealing with the problem at a fundamental level. And in meta medicine, we understand that there is always a reason for illness. It is not random. The body is far too intelligent to make mistakes. And if it is ill, the body is trying to tell us something. It has not made a mistake. It has not done something wrong. It's actually doing exactly what it needs to do to get our attention. So conventionally speaking, when people get cancer, we're told, well, it's genetic, or maybe it was your lifestyle, your food, your diet, smoking, or maybe it's random. And generally that's what people are told, and they're not guided to look at things from a deeper level. And really, this is all about education and awareness. And 25 years ago, I did not know any of this. All I knew was to go to a doctor. You never asked why you were ill. You just did not question why you were ill. You simply went to the doctor to get a medication, or maybe you were advised to get surgery. You were never asked to look at yourself and ask, well, what is the problem? And I remember many years ago, I had a really, really bad, tight, painful jaw. And I was sent to a TMJ specialist. And I'd got to the point where I almost couldn't eat because I just couldn't open my mouth properly to put food in my mouth. And he advised to me that the only thing really that would help would be surgery. And he said that, well, that will be the only thing that can really help. Well, I left his surgery thinking, well, I don't really feel like doing that. That really doesn't appeal to me, to have an operation on my jaw. And I went away and started to look at, okay, what is really causing this TMJ problem? And it came down to stress and a lot of frustration, because when we get frustrated, we grind our teeth and clamp our jaw shut. And really, that was the issue that I had to get to. And my jaw healed completely by itself quite quickly. Now, some of the conventional solutions for cancer, obviously we know these solutions: radiation, chemotherapy, surgery. They tend to be the main solutions. And of course, unfortunately, there's a lot of side effects from some of these solutions. They're not pleasant at all. That's an understatement. And so one of the things that we want to do with metamedicine is really help people avoid these painful approaches, because maybe there is a different way. Maybe there is another way. And I'm not saying that sometimes we might not need surgery or chemotherapy or radiation. It's not for me to say what is right for an individual person. But what is my job is to show people that there are alternatives if we really start looking at a deeper cause to what has caused the problem in the first place. Because our body has an incredible ability to heal if we give it the opportunity to do so. But we must understand things at a deeper level if that is going to happen. Now, from a meta health perspective, and meta, as I said, means beyond or above, there are reasons for all symptoms. And it's very interesting because our understanding and perspective of illness will actually determine the solutions we seek. Now, I recently created a program, the 5 Levels of Healthcare. It's a free online program where I go into detail into how our perspective and understanding of health will lead us to choose A, B, C type of therapy. And so if we expand our perspective on health, we can actually find different opportunities for healing. And if we expand our perspective and our viewpoint, we're going to start finding different opportunities and solutions. And usually the type of people that I work with, they've usually gone down the route of the doctor or the specialist. They've gone down a lot of avenues and they still haven't got a solution. Their symptoms are still there. And they get to a point where they just feel so bad and so desperate that something opens up in their mind and they are willing to look at something different. And this place has to be reached. Psychologically, we have to sometimes reach this place where we're ready and willing and open to see something new and different. And once we do that, then we're going to start learning and finding other healthcare options. But it's really interesting, until we're open for that, then we tend to only see what we already know. So I recommend that you check out the 5 levels of healthcare if you'd like to learn more about this. So there's a lovely saying, your issues are in your tissues. And another saying that feelings buried alive never die. And whatever we have going on inside of us at a mind level or an emotional level, it is all stored inside our body, which is why we say your issues are in your tissues. And whatever feelings we've had in our life that are unpleasant, that we've not been able to deal with, they stay inside of us. And because everything is energy, and that's quantum physics, and I've spoken about that on other videos, I'm not going to go into detail in that now, but because everything is energy, if we have emotions stuck inside our body, they will have an effect physiologically on our cells and tissues. And this is why we say feelings buried alive never die. Now, the way I like to describe how our body creates symptoms is actually quite simple. First of all, our body gives us feedback in the form of sensations, body sensations, such as a gut feeling. And this can quite quickly become stress or an emotion. And when it turns into stress or emotion, that's when it starts to rewire the cells into a state of dis-ease. And we even say it, the word says it all. Disease is a state of dis-ease. And if that goes on long enough, then we start to experience symptoms. So these are 3 distinct steps. Although the interesting thing is we tend to only really notice when things have become symptoms, when it's actually become painful and uncomfortable and disruptive to our life. We actually have the ability to put up with a lot until it gets really, really bad. And then what we find is we're dealing with the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. But actually a lot of things were going on beforehand, it's just that we weren't noticing them. So what we're going to be talking about in this webinar is how every cell and tissue and organ have a dual function. So for example, to give a very easy example, our digestive system has the function of digesting our food. But metaphysically, our digestive system has to digest our life. And in particular, it has to digest our emotional life. Now, what's really, really interesting, and this comes from MetaHealth, is that what they've discovered is that different areas of the brain are activated by different emotional themes. And different areas of the brain are connected with different organs and organ tissues. And they found this out through CT scans. And they've discovered that certain areas of the brain will light up when we have a certain emotional theme, or often what is called a conflict theme. So for example, feeling abandoned, that would be an emotional theme. And so different areas of the brain are affected by different emotional themes. And these areas of the brain correlate with very specific organs or organ tissues in the body. There is what is called a brain relay from a specific part in the brain that actually correlates with a specific organ or organ tissue. So let's look at these 4 brain relays. So first of all, we have the brainstem, which is the oldest part of our brain, also known as the reptilian brain. We have the cerebellum, we have the cerebral medulla, and we have the cerebral cortex, which is the outermost layer of the brain. And we look at the emotional themes that are connected with these 4 brain relays. So the brainstem is connected with survival and digestion. And this makes sense because fundamentally, in order to stay alive, we have to take in food and digest our food, and we also need reproduction for the species to continue. Now, physically, our digestive system has to digest the food that we take into our body. Metaphysically, it has to digest our emotional life. The emotional theme for the cerebellum is protection and integrity. The emotional theme for the cerebellum is protection and integrity. And interestingly enough, some of the tissues and organs that are related to this are the pericardium, for example, which protects the heart, and the skin, which wraps around the whole body. The cerebral medulla, the emotional theme here is self-worth. And the cerebral cortex, the theme is our social environment and how safe we feel in our social environment. So here we have the 4 emotional themes: the cerebral medulla, self-worth; the cerebellum, protection and integrity; the brainstem, survival and digestion; and the cerebral cortex, our social environment. Now, another really important thing to explain is what we call the 2 phases of healing. And this really dispels many myths around if we are ill, our body has made a mistake. So if we look at this diagram here, we start off over on the left here with normal health. And then we're going along in life and something happens that we call a conflict shock. And this thing may seem minor or it may be really major, but it is some sort of a trauma or a shock. And what that does is it puts the body into the stress response, puts the body into the natural fight-flight response, because ultimately our body has to stay alive. We tend to forget, but all the time our body is monitoring, am I safe and am I okay to stay alive? So the body goes into the stress phase, which is, as we say, stressful. And this stress phase can go on for just a day, or it could be a week, a month, a year, or several years. But at some point, something will happen where we have what is called a conflict resolution or a regeneration trigger. And what this means is that this issue that we've been dealing with is resolved. And this allows the body then to return or go back into what we call the regeneration phase or the healing phase. And the body can go into a self-healing phase. And this is quite natural, and it is what needs to happen after being in the stress phase. When we're in the stress phase, we're stuck in what is called the sympathetic nervous response. And when we're in the healing phase, our body moves into what we call the parasympathetic nervous system response. And it's a yin and yang. They balance each other out, and we need that balancing out. And that is normal and that is healthy. And once we've gone through this regeneration phase, then we come out the other side and health and equilibrium and homeostasis are restored. To give you a simple example, if we come back here to normal health, say somebody just walked home one day, walked into their house and discovered that their partner was having an affair. They find their partner at home with somebody else. That would put their body into a shock, as you can imagine, and their body would go into the stress response. And then say that went on for some time trying to deal with that, then their body stays in the stress response. And then at some point, let's say they have a conflict resolution or a regeneration trigger, and that may be, for example, they finally decide to leave each other. And their partner leaves and they're in the house by themselves. And although that may be really sad, there's a sense of relief inside them because finally the issue has found a completion. And at that point, then their body would go into the healing phase, into the regeneration phase. And they may find themselves coming down with a cold or feeling ill at that point. And actually, that's the body healing. And then once they've come through that and their body has regained equilibrium and restored itself, then it will come out the other side and be healthy. Now, again, that's quite simplistic explanation at this point. That's all we need for this webinar. It can be more complex than that. And in fact, we can have multiple conflict phases going on at any one time. And often when that is happening, that is when people have really chronic illness, which are the sorts of illnesses that I tend to help people with. Now, another way of looking at this same stress regeneration cycle is this diagram here, which is based on a yin-yang symbol, where we have the yin, the yang, the up, the down, the red, the blue. It's this yin-yang, two sides of the coin phase. And we have the stress trigger, triggering a stress phase, a regeneration trigger triggers the regeneration phase, and then we come out the other side into health. And this stress regeneration cycle is so important to understand, because often when we're in the regeneration phase in particular, that is when we can have a lot of symptoms, and when we think we're actually ill and there's something wrong. Well, yes, we are ill, inverted commas, we do have symptoms, but often it's because we're actually regenerating. Our body is naturally regenerating itself. It needs to go through this phase, and then it will come out the other side back into health. I remember once many years ago when I had an iron infusion, and one can get side effects from an iron infusion, and I didn't know it. And I woke up 24 hours later feeling so sick. So sick. I was vomiting. I could hardly move. I was basically on my back in bed for 24 hours. Now, even though I'd never had an eye infusion before, I hadn't had that experience before, I knew that my body was in a regeneration phase and it was trying to deal with what had been put into it. It was quite a shock for the body to have the iron put into it. And it was just trying to balance itself out and restore homeostasis. And that was why I felt so sick. Now, if I hadn't known that, I would have been really worried. I would have been down the A&E asking for a doctor. But I just intuitively knew that my body was just trying to sort itself out and that I had to ride it out and that it was going to be okay. Now, obviously, if that had gone on for days and days, then yes, I would have gone to the doctor. But within 24 hours, literally, I woke up the next day and I was absolutely fine. So our body knows what it's doing. We just have to trust that it knows what it's doing. And this is a big missing piece. People are not trusting their body. And one of the reasons is that they don't know enough about their body. And we as human beings, we can learn more about our body, and it is our duty to learn how our body operates. So let's come now to look at the prostate gland and what is really going on potentially at a metaphysical level that you may not realize. And this is so important if you want to understand more about prostate cancer. The physical function is to store and secrete fluid, which makes up to 10 to 30% of the seminal fluid. And there is also smooth muscle around it, which helps ejaculation. Now, obviously, if we look at the overall theme here physically of the prostate gland, it has to do with sexual reproduction and sexual prowess, right? That makes sense. And interestingly enough, the metaphysical meaning of the prostate gland is very much to do with feeling like a man. Now, that makes sense, doesn't it? And you're going to see in a moment how feeling emasculated creates problems in the prostate gland. So when we look at the prostate gland in meta health, it is divided into the prostate gland and the prostate ducts. So first of all, we look at the prostate gland. And the theme here is, I'm not being a man. And what we find is during the stress phase, cells grow, and in the regeneration phase, they will reduce. So what do we mean if we say, what is the stress phase? Well, the example that I gave earlier of, say, a man comes home and he finds his wife with another man, right? Now that would be a stress trigger, which would put him into a stress phase, which could last days, weeks, months, years, who knows. And during that stress phase, in the prostate gland, cells are likely to increase. And once the regeneration trigger happens and the body starts to reharmonize itself and bring itself back to balance, then those cells which have grown will reduce and disappear. So from a physical perspective, we find that cells grow during the stress phase in the prostate gland, and there is elevated cellular growth in the secretory part of the gland. And sometimes at this time, because the cells are growing, this is the time when a compact cauliflower-shaped secretory prostate tumor can grow. And there will also be elevated PSA markers. And this is what is going on during the stress phase. And then once the trauma or the shock is resolved, then the body will naturally go into its self-healing regeneration phase. And then the cells will reduce. All the extra additional cells which grew will naturally start to reduce and disappear. And there will often be degradation through a tuberculous caseating necrosis. And at this time, PSA markers are likely to normalize. And interestingly enough, during this time then, during the time that the cells are reducing, people may experience symptoms such as cramps or pain or prostatitis. And it is often during this phase that a tumor is diagnosed because of the pain. Because the interesting thing is, often during the stress phase, we're so taken up with the stress and trying to deal with the situation and trying to resolve the situation that we don't notice pain during this time. That there may not be pain, and also we may not notice it. And it's only once we hit the regeneration trigger and the regeneration phase and our body goes, right, I can just get on, I can relax finally, that whole horrible situation has been resolved. And then the body starts to break down this tumor, and that's when we can experience pain. But the interesting thing is the body's just doing what it needs to do. It's doing its job. It knows exactly what it needs to do. And then what happens? We come along, we go into fear, we get diagnosed with a tumor, we go into the fear of cancer and dying and all that sort of stuff, which is understandable if you don't understand this. But when we understand that our body is actually doing its job perfectly and we don't need to interfere, we just need to look after ourselves and we need to heal ourselves emotionally, then the body will finish its job. So ultimately, we could say that the prostate is very much tied up with issues of not feeling like a man. Often it's things like, for example, like not feeling like the man of the household or not being man enough. And when we have these sort of issues going on, then this can create a problem in the prostate. And so the opposite of that, of course, is reaching a place where we feel I am strong and powerful as a man. And we feel that authentically within. And sometimes we're going to need help to get to that point. Now, the brain relay of the prostate ducts is a different relay. The prostate gland was the brainstem, which is the survival, whereas the prostate ducts are the cerebral cortex. And this is the opposite way round, where in the stress phase, there is a lessening of cells, and then in the regeneration phase, there's an increase in cells. And so during the stress phase, the ducts can widen, whereas in the regeneration phase, there can be swelling and inflammation, because that swelling and inflammation is connected with this plus phase, this growth of cells. And in this phase, there can often be a diagnosis of prostatitis. Now, if we look at the metaphysical function and metaphysical theme and emotional theme of the prostate ducts, this is connected with territory marking our territory as a man. And it's also connected with sexual frustration and not feeling loved. So as I'm going through this and you're watching it, you might want to ask yourself, do I feel sexually frustrated? Do I feel unloved? Do I feel like I've lost my territory? And it could be territory at home, Or it could be at work, for example. Say somebody loses their job, they've been in a job for 50 years, or they retire. There's this feeling of like loss of being a man and loss of territory. And it's interesting because I knew a man who got prostate cancer. And when I looked at his relationship with his wife, he was very emasculated by his wife. And he put up with it for years and years and years and just didn't say anything and didn't stand up for himself. And eventually he developed prostate cancer. And then, interestingly enough, after that, he went through treatment and he became well again. But soon after that, he finally decided that he was going to leave his wife. And he did. And he needed to do that to stand up for himself as a man. That was his way of dealing with it. So I hope this has been interesting for you. I hope that it's perhaps opened your eyes to more possibilities around if you have a prostate problem, maybe there are other things that need to be looked at. Maybe it's time to look at what is going on in your life and how you feel about what is going on in your life, in particular around this theme of being a man, to see if perhaps there are underlying reasons as to why your body has created these symptoms. Because the body never creates symptoms randomly. Symptoms always have a meaning. Your body is far too intelligent to make mistakes. It knows exactly what it's doing. You just have to be able to interpret the message beneath the symptoms. And that is what I help people to do. So until our next meeting, I wish you good health.